This will commence with our keynote address. General Petraeus doesn't really need much of an introduction. He is, as you know, a retired four-star general from the Army, and currently he's not only a partner at KKR, but he's chairman of KKR Global Institute, and he's also chairman of KKR Middle East Institute. In addition to that, as you probably all know, he was the fourth CIA director. He oversaw all coalition forces in Iraq, and he was commander of U.S. forces in Afghanistan. If I only had a pinch of that right, I think I'm doing pretty well for this early in the morning without coffee. But General Petraeus, I know you've got a busy schedule, and I can't thank you enough. This is your fourth time here at C3, and I think that is probably one of my most admirable honors, having you back 4 times. It's been terrific.
Well, thanks very much, Ransel. Thanks for the warm welcome. It is great to be back, although every year that I do come back, I wonder why in the world people want to hear from a soldier at a global healthcare conference. My only explanation is that I guess I've experienced so much in hospitals over the years, having been shot, fractured my pelvis, survived prostate cancer, giant cell arteritis, numerous encounters with the orthopedics. I should be able to do these operations myself by now. But it is always a pleasure to be here with you. What you are doing is hugely important. The pace of this work, as the doctor explained, is now being accelerated dramatically by artificial intelligence and all of the capabilities that it begins. I was recently with some of the leading AI companies. Anthropic's leaders said, you know, right now we're at the level of a very good graduate student. Next year, we'll be at the level of an impressive PhD, perhaps even from Princeton, of course. You know, you have Harvard because everybody can't get into Princeton. And 2 years from now, we're going to be at the level of a Nobel laureate. So the pace is absolutely breathtaking. Using it to its full effect, together with all of the other breakthroughs that have taken place in DNA and so forth and so on, is going to be extraordinary in the years that lie ahead. And of course, I'm privileged to be interviewed by an individual who has been one of the pioneers over decades when it comes to drug discovery. And I can only imagine what these new technologies are going to enable you and your team to do. But Ransel, before I submit to the interrogation here from the good doctor, I do want to congratulate you once again, you and the C3 International team, for pulling together such an extraordinary group of individuals engaged in global healthcare. Thank you.
Thank you, General Petraeus. You know, General Petraeus just said, and he said earlier, they didn't know why he was getting invited back and back again as an old soldier to talk to a healthcare conference. The point is, whether or not it's looking at the global world, worrying about the new geoeconomic events that are occurring, they do impact healthcare because strategy impacts how we utilize healthcare. And long ago in America, in 1945 actually, Vannevar Bush, who was an advisor both to the Manhattan Project and to Roosevelt, decided that the world was going to change and we weren't going to use science and medicine to win wars, but to move forward and protect American development. And what he did was help found the NIH, the NSF, and looked at funding from the government as a partner for curiosity, for innovation. And it was the role of industry to pick up what it needed to do. So strategy becomes critically important, and right now we're all worried about China taking over the biopharmaceutical world. Competition's good, and talent is different than innovation. We do a lot of great innovating in America, and that's not going to change. But General Petraeus, We've got a new geoeconomic world out there. It's changing dramatically as fast as AI, actually faster than AI, is changing the world. How do you look at it impacting our world right now?
Well, it's saving lives. It's prolonging lives. It is making lives better. On and on and on. You can add any number of different interpretations about how this is affecting us. But all you need to do is look at, say, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, for all of the challenges that are out there, too, especially in the United States with obesity, the scourge of illegal narcotics, all of these others. Still, by and large, the average American is so far ahead of where the average American was 10, 20, 30 years ago. And a lot of this is due to what is going on in the fields that you've been so impressive in. At the Sun Valley Conference this summer, there's always on Saturday morning the several startups that brief this extraordinary group of billionaires and one old retired soldier. And one of them this year plausibly laid out how life is going to be prolonged by what it is that his particular startup is doing. Others laid out what they're going to do in terms of, actually one of them was finding strategic minerals. So this extraordinary innovation that has always characterized the United States is still very, very much ongoing. But obviously all of this has to be fueled by, essentially by finance, by money, by investment, and so forth. And if that model is going to change, then leaders like you and others and those in the world of business, KKR manages $700 billion after all, owns over 130 companies, and has minority interest in another 130. We're all going to have to figure out together what the new model will be, who's going to pick up which part of the innovation process, how to avoid the valley of death as you go from actually all of the tests and trials and all the rest of that to get to the point where you have a proven, viable, commercially available product. And I think that's going to be one of the challenges of our time. Again, if the government is not going to do what it has traditionally done, as you laid out, dating back to Vannevar Bush and even perhaps before then there have to be new models, and we have to ensure that they are brought to life, that they're then funded, and that we continue to be in the United States, but also in a number of other areas. And in fact, the Gulf states, look, the reason why I was made the chairman of KKR Middle East was not so we could more effectively get investment from the sovereign wealth funds. We have that. PIF and others are all big investors with us. It's because we now believe the Gulf states are investable, and that the leaders there recognize at this moment that for all of the extraordinary wealth that they're getting for the export of oil and natural gas, that there are such great infrastructure needs that they actually need outside capital to invest with them. And that is a big idea. You know, strategic leadership is about getting the big ideas right, communicating them effectively, overseeing the implementation of the big ideas, and then determining how you need to refine the big ideas as the situation evolves, as you experience successes, setbacks, and so forth, so that you can do it again and again and again. So what we're talking about now is a change to the big ideas that have existed about how the United States as a whole funds, encourages, incentivizes, again, the kind of innovation which you've been in the forefront of for many decades. If that's changing, we got to figure out how it is that we're going to enable it so that we can continue to compete. You know, bring on competition. You're interviewing a guy whose aide described him as the most competitive man on the face of the earth. And boy, it started with morning runs and everything else, and it continued throughout the day. And the U.S. is and will be competitive. Arguably, I hope, the most competitive force on the face of the earth, but we have to enable that competition.
I love that, and it's the most important thing in strategy, because being competitive is a big deal, and how we look at the world right now is quite important. I think I actually am the most competitive person in the world, because when
we could have a push-up contest here, abs, running, you name it.
I would do well, just so you know.
You know, if you ask me how many push-ups I can do, my response is always one more than you, big guy.
I love that. I actually think I can do one more than you.
Take your jacket off.
Right. So at any rate, very interestingly, you should all know that we have led the world actually in the fields like metabolic diseases, obesity, and everyone's working along with Eli Lilly and a million other individuals on these new GLP-1s, which are meant to change a global medical problem. We at Graviton actually are making a new drug. We didn't use AI, we used intelligence that was human, and we're making a drug that I think is going to marginalize all the hegemony in the GLP-1 field, so that will be cute. You'll learn that in the future.
Can you give some of it to Vladimir Putin so it will suppress his appetite for Ukraine?
So, sadly, Putin and Russia are not the players we worry about right now. And but we do worry about his aggressiveness and rather insanity. You should all know that in 1934, in New York City, the average life expectancy was 44 years of age, right? 20 years later, it was in the 70s. Only because of two things that happened in the world, vaccines and penicillin. And the world changed. And medicine is changing that world. It's changing the world of warfare because we've saved more lives. Unfortunately, the wounded get affected.
Incredible advances. I used to do a monthly briefing to Secretary Gates, Secretary of Defense Gates, when I was commanding in Iraq, then the whole region, Central Command, then Afghanistan, and it focused on how long it took us to get soldiers from the point of injury, of being wounded on the battlefield, to the level of care, the first level of care that is so instrumental in ensuring the survival of those soldiers. We were doing it in roughly 43 to 44 minutes, even in Afghanistan, which didn't have the infrastructure, much faster distances than Iraq. Iraq was relatively straightforward. Afghanistan, much more violent in certain respects as well. 43 minutes, and that meant if you got there within the golden hour, and of course, keep in mind that we're not just bringing a medevac bird in, we're bringing a medevac bird in that has all kinds of life-saving equipment. If we can, doctors on boards, if not very, very skilled combat medics and so forth. And the survival rate was way, way over 90%. That is absolutely historic. And again, it's a tribute to all of the activities that the medical field took to ensure that we could reach that kind of metric, which is extraordinary.
It is unbelievable, but the entire strategies of both warfare, how do we look at what defense did, especially when you were a leader in that area, and how that carries over to what you look at as a partner at KKR, as somebody that's viewing a new world?
Well, again, innovation is not unique just to the business world or the world of startups. But I should also note that I'm a personal venture capitalist. Many of the partners at KKR, I've been personally invested in over 30 startups over the years. And for what it's worth, as I look at a startup, many of these are quite technically involved. I can't actually read the code. I can't look inside. I don't necessarily know what the competition is out there. Even it's difficult to assess what the total addressable market, all these other factors that go into this. I'm looking at what is the quality of leadership. This is a founder who's presenting to me, and what's the quality of the big idea. And if you have the two of those, especially if you have a leader who can scale the company, so you don't have the situation where you're starting to achieve traction and success and your annual recurring revenue is going up, but all of a sudden you realize this person can't take it any farther. He or she was a great technologist, but the limits of leadership here are now obvious. So I think that's what you're looking at. You look for the same thing on the battlefield. Of course, nothing pushes, catalyzes innovation like losing a war, which is what we were doing in Iraq prior to the surge. President Bush was pretty desperate when he decided, against the advice of most of his advisors, not to pull out and give it up and throw in the towel, but to send additional forces, to send a new commander and a new ambassador, and to empower them to the greatest extent that was possible. But what turned that around was not the surge of forces, it was the surge of ideas. It was a 180-degree change in what it was we were doing on the battlefield, from pulling our forces out of the neighborhoods, consolidating on big bases, which we've been doing for a year or more, even as the violence, the Sunni-Shia civil war get ever more terrifyingly out of control, to going back into the neighborhoods, providing security to the people, separating them from the insurgents, the Al-Qaeda, the extremists, the Shia-supported militia, and then providing population security, using walls even, population control measures, biometric ID cards, technology again. And in the meantime, Secretary Gates, who loved bureaucratic infighting, he reveled in it, all of a sudden we start getting the systems that we'd been crying for. Remember, I'd been there as a 2-star and a 3-star before this, and then we did the counterinsurgency field manual. I'd been raising my hand saying we need V-shaped hull armored wheeled vehicles. We couldn't get them. I could buy them from South Africa for the Iraqis, but I couldn't buy them for our own forces. Drones, the onset of drones, a true battlefield innovation. Later this week, I go back to Iraq for the Ukraine for the 7th time since the full-scale invasion of 2022. The innovation there is breathtaking. What they are doing is unheard of. It's hard to comprehend. The last time I was there, I asked the commander of Ukrainian forces, just roughly, how many unmanned systems of all types did you use yesterday? Because it's not just in the air, it's not just short-range suicides, it's long-range, it's surveillance, it's maritime drones. How does a country that has no navy, Ukraine, sink 1/3 of the Russian Black Sea Fleet with aerial drones that find the Russian ships and maritime drones that sink them? They have maritime drones that launch anti-aircraft missiles from them, took down 2 fighters over Crimea. That was a surprise to those Russian fighters flying over occupied territory where they thought there was no threat. This innovation, when you're engaged in something as serious as, in Ukraine's case, their war of independence, really, their war of survival, is unbelievable. And it just keeps evolving at a pace. What we need in this field is the same kind of impetus, the same kind of catalyst, the same kind of seriousness of purpose, and as you said, that fierce competition to fuel all of it, along with the resources that need to be provided to enable it to take place.
Well, and that's an unbelievably important statement. You should all know, and it's probably in every field, but the general really is an example of it in the most important field. But leadership and strategic insight and innovation are everything. They're everything in biotech. For 100 years, for 100 years, people worked on the role of immunology in cancer with no results. And then suddenly, people understood what certain molecules were on T cells. And Keytruda and Optivo emerged, and cancer changed. Cancer therapy changed. With those innovations after 100 years of trying to figure things out. So that was a big deal. But leadership and innovation need to go hand in hand. And by the way, I'm going to tell you that AI won't help us. You still need the leadership and insights of human beings to tell you whether that piece of AI information is correct or the other piece. And that's going to be a big deal. We're not going to get rid of smart generals with AI.
No, look, you know, people used to ask me, what do you look for in your immediate subordinates, if you will? So the 3 stars when I was a 4-star in Iraq or Afghanistan or Central Command. And, you know, they'd say they knew I was into fitness. I said, do you want somebody who can run with you? I said, my God, did you look at those 2 3-stars? I mean, these are the Clydesdale school of generals. These are former interior football linemen. You know, neither of them have any knees that are worth anything. What I look for is none of that. I mean, it's nice to have stamina. It's nice to have all these qualities that people describe as necessary for leadership. What it really comes down to is judgment, because it's judgment that enables you to get the big ideas right, to communicate them, oversee them, and then how to keep them right by refining them as the situation evolves, as you learn lessons, as you get new insights. I do think that AI is going to enable the strategic leaders, those that have the sparks of genius, the innovation, insights, and so forth, will be enabled enormously by AI. I use AI just constantly. We've had hundreds of applications within a matter of months at KKR that are saving extraordinary amounts of time. I don't need a speechwriter anymore. AI is an incredible speechwriter. I feel when I was a speechwriter, I remember especially with one of my bosses, he was the NATO Supreme Allied Commander Europe, my biggest mentor in my life, worked for him 3 times. He's the one that said, by the way, when I had a choice between going to graduate school and going to the Ranger Regiment, he said, have you ever considered raising your intellectual sights farther than the maximum effective range of an M60 machine gun? I got the point. I went to graduate school. It was what he said I needed most, which was an out of my intellectual comfort zone experience. And that's what it provided. We all should be seeking those constantly. But working for him, I wasn't writing for him. I was writing with him. And that's the best of all kinds of speechwriters and the best of all kinds of speech deliverers if you're a speechwriter. And AI is very, very much doing that. I've actually trained my own AI enabler, if you will, or writer. He has a name, she, Argus. Argus was a mythological Greek character that had 100 eyes, always looking all around the world. Even as some of the eyes slept, the others were open. And Argus knows to call me General Petraeus.
Smart. I only made my ex-wife call me Dr. Waksal.
It's a bit given to flattery, but that's the,
Perfect.
Yeah.
Well, interestingly, in medicine and science, that's really, really critical right now. We are at inflection points in a number of areas. We've sort of changed what goes on in cancer, sort of. So instead of virtually 100% of patients dying of non-small cell lung cancer, now 80%. That's a big deal, but it isn't what we really want to do in medicine. Autoimmune disease is rampant, and you should all know that in the next few years, we're going to see 50% of people who reach the age of 85 getting Alzheimer's. It's going to be a large event in the history of mankind. We're aging more dramatically, but we're getting Alzheimer's. If we don't cure it, the world will be bankrupt. Right now, all we do is pay for people dabbing their
although the
saliva.
GLPs are now apparently showing some promise in that regard as well, and also with dementia.
Yeah. It's not true.
Well, touch wood anyway.
We a couple of weeks in an Alzheimer's patient before they get dementia isn't yet where we want to go, but we'll get there. It is critical for us to get there, and in order to get there, we need the insights, we need the innovation and leadership of the kind that the general takes part in every day.
Well, look, it's kind of you, but again, you have exhibited that as well, as I've mentioned, and again, I would submit that it comes down to the components that you bring to a particular problem that enable you to provide the judgment, direction, and eventually big ideas. Keep in mind, by the way, again, big ideas don't hit you on the head like Newton's apple fully formed if you sit under the right tree. I've never, at least not for me. I get hit on the head by a kernel of a big idea, the seed of a big idea, and it then has to be shaped into a big idea by a lot of iteration typically. Ideally, it's very inclusive with all of your team members. You want all of them to feel like they're contributing anyway just for the good of the organization. You have to be open and transparent about it in general. And it's that process that ultimately gets you to the threshold of a big idea. And then you can start to flesh it out further and then begin to implement it, communicate it, oversee it, and then refine it and just continue that process again and again and again. But that model is crucial. I developed that explicitly when I was between the 3- and 4-star tours in Iraq, when we also developed the counterinsurgency field manual, which became the intellectual foundation on which we built this new strategy for the surge in Iraq, which again turned around completely. It took a country out of a violent Sunni Shia civil war, drove violence down by nearly 90% within 18 months, and it kept on going down until tragically we left and the Iraqi prime minister took some seriously misguided sectarian actions that tore the fabric of society again. But this process, this intellectual construct is hugely important. There's obviously lots of detail under each of these. But I see this all the time at KKR as well. You know, we were at 83 billion when I joined the company 12 years ago. We're now at nearly 700 billion. How did that happen? New big ideas, refinement of existing big ideas. And that's the process that you engage in repeatedly. Any of the strategic leaders here, you have to get the big ideas right for the endeavor that you're guiding, Doctor. And it's very clear why it is that you're achieving that kind of success that you have. And you know how great that the kingdom provides the kind of resources necessary to do that there when you were unable, frankly, to get that in Europe. And Europe now recognizes that they've been underinvesting. The Draghi report, of course, highlights the fact that they need to spend literally $1 trillion more to underwrite innovation if they're going to compete with the United States and now also with China and some other areas in which there's intellectual critical mass.
No, it's actually interesting because it's critically important to understand, and you just heard it, and he didn't say it, but to be able to connect dots is everything in innovation. These are disparate pieces, and General Petraeus had to look at disparate pieces of what was going on when he was in Iraq, when he's doing what he's doing at KKR, and you need to be able to connect those dots way before it becomes a complete picture. And so to me, that's everything. And it's quite interesting right now in the field of medicine that we have a lot of work to do, and that's going to be fun. You should all know that 78% of the global healthcare market, pharmaceutical market, is in the United States. 15% is in Japan, which means a sliver that's left is Europe and China. But China's growing, Europe isn't. And that's a big deal, and it's going to be a big deal. It's going to be a huge deal for the MENA states, for the Middle East and North Africa, because that's going to be a growth area as well, and probably take over for Europe if they don't learn something new, and it's about the new.
Look, it's extraordinary what's going on in the Gulf states, and I'd single out really the UAE, Saudi Arabia, to a degree Qatar. Not to say that, again, Kuwait, Bahrain, the others are not significant, but there's been a concerted effort over decades to build the kind of intellectual critical mass and the kind of infrastructure necessary to enable what is now happening. And I think we're just in the early stages of this because of the gathering of this intellectual critical mass. But, you know, I go to see the National Security Advisor in Abu Dhabi. He always says he wants to talk geopolitics. Within about 12 minutes, we're talking about data centers, hyperscalers, teraflops, all of this kind of arcane technical words and so forth about really what is, again, enabling AI, because it is in the consumption, the generation, transmission, management of electricity to enable all this. By the way, that's going to be a real challenge here in the United States, especially if you don't continue to invest in all possible ways of generating electricity, in addition to fossil fuels, where we are the leaders in the world. By the way, you know why the United States leads in production of oil and natural gas? Because, you know, we were at 5 million barrels per day of oil back when I was early on as CIA director, and that was termed peak production. That was peak oil. We're now at 13 million barrels. The reason for that, we invented the technology of deep directional drilling, hydraulic fracturing, seismic big data. We have agile capital markets. We have wildcatters that can build this out very, very rapidly. Yes, the infrastructure to push it around, et cetera, and a law that enables people to sell mineral rights underneath their land. That doesn't exist in most places in the world. You bring that constellation of factors together, and wallahi, you have something that is really quite extraordinary. It's that kind, again, it's that kind of landscape, those attributes, those qualities, those incentives, the opportunities that have enabled the United States. And as we're going to make changes to what federal funding does or other funding or what have you, we're going to have to ensure that we maintain that kind of environment, because that's what facilitates what it is that you and so many others have done for many decades.
No, that's critical. So, you just heard the general talk about being able to go down through rock and then over to get to oil basins that really changed America's ability to be a player in this world. It was an innovative moment, and the same sorts of things happen in our industry. We are looking at moments, they're inflection points, and they are aha moments that tell us we can do something that is different than anybody else has ever been doing. And that's the moment that we all have to choose in order to understand how to innovate and change. It's very interesting. Recently I was at an event, and it was in someone's home, and some lawyer from France was talking to me about healthcare pricing. And I looked at a painting on the wall and I said, you don't tell anybody how much that painting costs them. And he said, yes, but when my mother's sick, I really don't care how much that painting costs. I don't want to bankrupt her. And we live in a new world right now. America pays for most of the costs of pharmaceuticals. It's going to change. And part of that is because of all the middlemen, not because of what we do in the biopharmaceutical area. And that's going to change. So lots of things are going to happen. And I imagine that when the general sits either with me or someone else in 5 years, he's going to be talking about the fact that Alzheimer's is going to be changed, that more people will be cured of cancer, that autoimmune disease will begin to go by the wayside. And he's going to say the same thing: innovation, leadership.
Well, inshallah. But again, keep in mind that another component of the ecosystem here in the United States that has been so critically important is our research universities. And there's many, many of these. It's not just the Ivies and Stanford and Caltech and MIT and a handful of others like that. They're all throughout our country. And again, if we're going to change the model there as well, we're going to have to figure out how we adapt to that, because they have often been, as you know, you look at a place, in fact, the convergence between Harvard and MIT right next door to each other, the innovation that has taken place up there is truly extraordinary. And it's because they have that intellectual critical mass. I would submit that it is the greatest in the world. Breaks my heart as a Princetonian to acknowledge that, but there it is. At least I was a fellow at Harvard for 6 years, and our son and daughter-in-law both went there. So anyway, but it is something truly unique. But there are other elements of that. In fact, I had a chair at USC for 6 years. We looked at what Stanford had, and we distilled the elements that enabled Stanford to be the core of Silicon Valley, and then thought about how could we replicate that at Silicon Beach, the Los Angeles version of it. And it has really done very, very impressively. But there are certain unique characteristics that surround our greatest of research universities that enable the kind of innovation that has been so critical in this field and many, many others. And again, we have to ensure that we preserve that as well. And frankly, that we welcome the best and brightest from around the world, as we always have, to ensure that we're trying to be, we should be the magnet, we want to be the magnet for that kind of talent, I think, as well.
That's a very big deal, and you should all know that back in the mid-'70s, 2 events occurred in the world, 2. One happened in a collaboration between Stanford and UCSF. The other happened at University of Cambridge in England. What happened at Stanford and UCSF were 2 graduate students in the laboratories of Cohen and Boyer. They did the first work on recombinant DNA. It was already predicted by the work of the Nobel laureate Paul Berg. Across the pond in England, Caesar Milstein and Herb Kohler made the first monoclonal antibodies. You should all know talking about innovation and a lot of what goes on in America. The research facility at Stanford and the research groups at UCSF said, we're going to patent this and we're going to make money. And they did. They made a fortune for Stanford and UCSF. And the world of biopharmaceuticals changed. At University of
And
Cambridge.
by the way, it's okay to make some money doing what
absolutely.
you're doing. This is not a bad thing.
I'm a big believer in that. At University of Cambridge, Caesar Milstein went to his research office. They told him to go back to his laboratory and not act like an American. By the way, England changed dramatically after that. But no royalties went to University of Cambridge for their seminal work, and royalties went to UCSF and Stanford. So it's a big deal. Things change when innovation is utilized by industry and our scientific institutes. And by the way, there's more innovation in Nebraska, in Atlanta, and Chicago, as well as Boston and New York. Rockefeller has won more Nobel Prizes virtually than any other university, science and research university in the world. Talent is different than innovation, and competition and threats of change will keep us innovating in America as long as we don't screw it up, and I don't think we will.
No, I don't think so either. I think, along with Winston Churchill, who famously observed that democracy is the worst form of government except for all the others. And also I find some solace in his other observation that you can always count on the Americans to do the right thing after they've done all the other things.
Well, on that note, Born, can you... I have to say, Dr. Waksal and General Petraeus, I've heard for 14 years a lot of keynotes. This, I think, and this even usurps yours, General Petraeus, has been one of the most fascinating and brilliant keynotes. And I can't thank you both enough for really an enlightening morning and really lifting this to another level, because every year I have to beat the bar, and you just helped me beat that bar. So thank you very much. All of you are going to get a handshake.